So again, my name is Jens. I'm from a Swedish company called Polymer Factory, and we do dendritic components for a lot of different application. But myself, I'm responsible for the mass spec community to take care of you, since we have some nice products to be playing that is intended for mass calibration and tuning of instruments. And we've been doing that for some years for MALDI, but we are dipping our toes into the ESI and the IMNS since we see a very great benefit for the community there. And what I want to show you today is basically this paper, which we published just 2 weeks ago. It got online. It still doesn't have a page number and so forth, but it's out online on the ASAP. In JASMAS, and it's a nice international collaboration that we did with Ohio State, with the Rosalind Institute, and with the University of Düsseldorf in Germany, and the university here in Stockholm, and myself in there. And what we did is basically we tried to see how our molecules perform in different ion mobility devices, and how those guys can be modeled as well, computed, and how that all turns out compared to other calibration solutions that the community is used to.
Jens,
so just to keep you all on track, and what we're actually talking about is we are doing dendrimers, and our dendrimers are based on this monomer here, which is called bis-MPA, and everybody who remembers their Class 1 organic chemistry can easily see you have a carboxylic function and 2 hydroxyl functions. So this makes the possibility to put you an ester there, right? Let me just get my laser pointer here. Obviously, if you would just toss this in a round bottom flask and heat it and get rid of the water, you would get something that we call a hyperbranched polymer. Basically, you couldn't define where the chain grows and where it stops, and so forth. So you wouldn't really have a control about the structure. But we actually are pretty decent organic chemists over here, so we do have a way for that. And so we can basically go from a starting material like this triol here, and we couple it with 3 of those units, and we go to 6-fold alcohol to a 12, 24, 48, and 96-fold. And we build this architecture to perfection. And hence, in the end of the day, or in the end of the months, to be honest, we know exactly the structure of the molecule we have. We know exactly how many carbons, oxygens, and hydrogens are in there. And with that, we know exactly the molecular weight of it. So how we do this, obviously, we work with protective groups. So we make a benzolidine protected functionality here. We make the anhydride and react that with an alcohol. We purify that, and we get the benzolidated like hydrophobic dendrimer like this. This is what we would call a generation 1, because it has 1 layer of our groups on it. Then we can in a controlled manner remove those protective groups, and you get to the OH, so the hydrophilic version of it, that we call a generation 1 OH. And that one you can again react with the anhydride and get to the generation 2, which you can deprotect to a generation 2 OH, and so forth. You can grow this to generation 3, deprotect it, and grow it another round, and another round, and another round. So in the end, you find a limit here, and this goes for drawing it on paper, as well as in the reaction flask. There is a limit where we exceed, we can't propagate it to perfection anymore. This is usually at generation 5, where we cannot guarantee a 100% reaction anymore, and hence we can't guarantee the batch-to-batch consistency that is crucial for this line of products. So if you do this approach for a bunch of different starting materials that have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 alcohol functions from the start, obviously for each generation you double the molecular weight more or less. And with that, you get this really nice distribution about over available molecular masses, where this guy, for example, here is a generation 4 TME. So it's based on this starting material, and it's grown, as I showed you, 4 times and deprotected. and it gives you a molecular weight of 5,800 something. And if you do that for all these molecules, you have basically a bunch of molecular weights available that you can mix and match however you want it for different applications. Obviously, the hydrophobic ones I showed you before are having nice properties as well, which we have been marketing as the MALDI because for the polymer people like you might be, hydrophobic matrices like DCTB, this works really nice and gives you really nice signals with really high ionization efficiency. In this paper here, however, we work with a hydrophilic one since it's mainly ESI-based ionization. And this would be a MALDI of the generation 4 component of the fourfold. And as you can see, it's really just this one component in our material. There's no distribution as you might be used to if you look at an MS spectrum of a polymer. Since it doesn't really have a repetitive unit of a linear polymer. And so it really just has one single mass. You might be able to see the sodium adduct and the potassium adduct, but it's really just one molecular species in the whole bunch. And that obviously is quite unique and just gives you here the isotopic resolution, obviously, on this MALDI spectrum. So this is great, and we have been doing this for quite some time. So this is what we've been selling to the community for some years now. So this is how we sell our MALDI calibration standards. They all have 6 very distinct signals that cover different mass ranges and are easily assignable and so forth. I don't want to do the commercial talk here, but this is old news. Then last year, we also went for the ESI, just to show you that those guys work in both positive mode, and they might are ionized mostly as sodium adducts. And in negative mode, you will find different ionization efficiency of the species, obviously, but still you will find each component as a adduct with the added acid. So if you do add acid, which is not necessarily at all for the positive mode, but for negative mode, you just add acetic acid or formic acid, and it will fly as the M plus acid minus. So if you add formic acid or formate to your solution, to your spraying solution, in negative mode, you will find the M plus formate ion. So that's why the masses in negative mode are slightly higher than the masses in positive mode. So now the question is, why is this of interest to IMS? Well, as I've shown you, we can control the mass really nicely. But due to the structure, the architecture of their systems, there's a nice twist to it. Because if you just imagine that as a spherical molecule, which it is, it's very limited in how the conformational properties can change. So if one core here, say this bond in this schematic structure here twists, it has to be because that guy has switched and that guy has switched. So there's no single branch that can change conformation without all the branches doing it. And that just gives you a symmetric structure. And it doesn't matter. We want to call it conformational purity or whatever you want to call it. It can have different angles and it can rotate, but if it does, all of the groups have to do. So that will give, or we thought, very nice mobility piece. Also, as compared to most products out there on the market now, they do not have any fluorine. They are not dispersed in aqueous or polar media as the tune mixes are nowadays, the Ultramar components, but they are truly soluble. So it gives you a very nice consistent intensity. So we do know that these guys have a very nice ionization efficiency in both MALDI and ESI, so you can use them for those 2 ionization platforms. And we can obviously choose from our library of molecules and choose which mass signals you want to have. We can tailor the polarity. We can have hydrophobic and hydrophilic ones. And we can also, if that is wanted for some reason, modify very specific which type of molecular or chemical functionality you want on the outer periphery of those molecules. On top of that, those guys are synthetic polymers. And with that, they have a shelf life of years. So there's no issue as you might have with protein or peptide standards that you have to have them in the freezer and they hydrolyze over time or they form some sulfuric bonds or whatever. They're pretty inert, even in biological systems. So you can also use them as internal calibration standards. So when we looked at what's out there right now on the tuning standards for IMMS, it's pretty limited in CCS coverage. It's pretty limited in charge state. It's fluorinated compounds, which at least in Europe might be forced to exist in some years due to regulations from the European Union. You would buy them as a ready-to-go mix, and with that you are stuck with the solvent and the concentration the supplier gives you. Also, some of them are perceived as sticky by users, so the peaks hang around during a measurement, which might be nice if you can use them as internal lock, but it can also be messing up your system. What we now know is what we can offer is a CCF coverage up to 1800 square angstrom, and we can have charge states from 1 to 7, and the same will go for the negative mode. And we don't have any fluorine. We have a solid that is soluble in your ESI solvent of choice, for most people at least. So they're soluble in alcohols, aqueous mixtures of those, ACN, so aqueous ICN or THF. For positive mode, we don't need any additives at all. And for the negative mode, you would need to add an acid. You can also add combinations of those, and you will have, obviously, for -1, you would have additional spaced signals, but it gets complicated then if you have higher charge because you might have one formic acid and one acetic acid on the same molecule, so your masses won't be as easy to predict and not as clean. They're not sticky at all, and they work both for ESI and for MALDI. So let's start with drift tube. This is what it looks like. So this is all the components we measured. I show you the Agilent tune mix down here in gray. So this is what everybody has been using so far, and all the colorful circles here up there are our drift tube values. So this has been done in Germany on the drift tube for positive mode in nitrogen. So what you can see is that all our components form nice and linear relationships if it comes to the M over Z towards the CCS. And this is, well, as expected, but it's very similar to the tune mix components down here. What you can see is that we can see some splitting between the protonated species and the sodiated species, and this simply depends on how much sodium you have around and how your system works in general. So this might differ from platform to platform if you see major protonated forms or sodiated forms. However, what we have found is it's either or. So if you have a +7, you will only find +7 protons. You will not find +3 protons and 3 sodium. So for some magic reason, those guys really like to stick with one or the other. But you can find +7 sodium and +7 proton, but you won't find mixtures, which is really nice for a tuning and calibration point of view, because you have easily predicted masses and easily predicted CCS values. So as you can see, with the charges ramping up here, so deep blue is +1, light blue or turquoise is +2, then you have a +3 and +4 and a +5. We getting thin up here then, +6 and +7. So this is really nice. It's easily predictable, and it really is reliable, and it makes a whole different calibration and tuning space as compared to the Agilent tuning mix sets down here. So this is drift tube values, and then what we did is we measured this on a timsTOF and on a water cyclic. So what you can see here then basically is Yeah, they do have the same trend. They open up this funnel in the space, but you can see that the guys down here align very nicely between the TWIMs and the TIMs. Whereas if you only go to +2, you see to start to see deviation from the two systems. And this is because those values are measured based on the calibration with existing calibration standards. So for the TIMs, the system was calibrated with the tune mix, the Agent tune mix, which is obviously down here. But then we measure up here with our well-known components. And as you can see, the values differ a lot between the Agilent Tune Mix calibrated TIMS and the Waters Major Mix calibrated cyclic data. So all of these are nicely reproducible for the systems themselves, but they deviate a lot from one another. And if you think about that, those guys have been calibrated down here, it makes perfect sense, right? Because the calibration works nicely down here. They give you the same values within a couple of percent. But if you deviate from this, which you might do if you are measuring on a protein or similar larger molecules or larger polymers, you will actually measure up here and extrapolate from your calibration down here. And if you do that and you just rely on that, you might actually have an error that is rather big. I will show you later in the numbers. If you look at the distribution of charges that we noticed on those instruments, it's a bit depending on your platform. So you will see a different distribution of charges for the same molecule. But mostly for the low guys, you see +1 and +2, and the bigger the molecule, the more charges it takes up, and you will see 2 or even 3 charge states from the same dendrimer. And this, you can always see that. You can see like these two here, for example, are the same molecule, and they just put another sodium on there, right? So in the M over Z, it changes a lot. But in the CCS, it just changes slightly because there's another sodium in there. So basically, we cover +1 to +7 with our molecular range as we have as of now. And we go up to, in the measured raw data from this, we got almost to 2,000 square angstrom based on the standard calibration tune mixes. If you then compare those values derived on those calibrations with the drift tube values, which we can agree on are what everybody agrees on to be true, then you can see that down here, the error from the TIMS is pretty neat. It's pretty low. It's like ±1% up to 500 square angstrom. But there's a major jump when the calibration CCS values from the tuning mix doesn't cover it anymore. So you see a gigantic jump up here to 5-6%, and some flattening out in the back about 4%. On the cyclic, it's a bit different. It's just basically the more the deviation from the calibration, the higher the error. So for the larger components, the error was 10%. And that's a lot, obviously, which I guess you guys can agree on. So then we did it the other way around, and we actually used the drift tube values to calibrate the system, and we measured calibration systems that are on the market. So this is a splash lipidomics that we ran on the timsTOF, where the timsTOF, as said, was calibrated with our components, and we measured it, and we calculated the deviation on the literature values for this specific one. And as you can see, it works pretty well. It's 0.5% plus minus roughly, and this is based on a calibration with 6 ions from our dendrimers. If you look how the error is if we measure the tuning mix, which basically in this case here is the ultramar components. So it's the perfluorinated 3-azophosphines. You can see that the error increases almost in a perfect linear mode here. Let me add to you that the calibration mix we used for this started at 300. sorry, 500. So it's actually not calibrated below here. So this is why this one sticks out, I guess. So what you can see is basically for each additional CF2 that is added on those components, um, the arrow gets bigger. And this is just because obviously those CF2 units introduce a conformational freedom to those molecules, which makes the peak broader and hence the calibration worse. So this is my working line here, that ours don't have that, and hence we can see that error, that deviation in the ultramar components that are generally accepted as a golden standard in the community. So how is that? Well, if you look at the one single component of those all those many we looked at, and you give it several spins in the cyclic, you can prolong the flight path, right? You can prolong the drift time. And whereas one cycle equals more or less the TIM stuff, that is on here, where you can see nice and slim mobility peaks. On the cyclic, you have the possibility to just say, all right, let's go 3 cycles, let's go 5 cycles, let's go 10 cycles. And what you can see is that it's really nice and well-defined peaks. And even at 10 cycles, which is a lot, the peak shape is still perfectly symmetric. So maybe that doesn't tell you a lot. So what I did here for you, or we did in the paper as well, in the supporting information, is comparing that to the component that's in the water major mix at the same mass, basically. So it's almost the same. And it's a poly DL alanine. It's a 10, the decamer, so 10 units. And what you can see is at 1 cycle, fine, it's comparable. At 3 cycles, the peak width of the polyaniline is already twice as big as ours. And at 5 cycles, you're at a factor 2.5. And the component didn't even make 10 cycles. Ours still have a really nice signal at 10 cycles, and the peak width is perfectly symmetric, and the peak width is 3.5 milliseconds, which is less than the polyaniline at 3 cycles. So this just shows you that, or showed us, that the perfect conformational purity of our components translates into really nice and well-defined peaks, even after a very long drift time, which just makes the peak assignment so much better. So as you can see that the peak shape here, it's broader, it's having a shoulder because there might be 2 conformational species in there. So this is not the case for our components, and hence the calibration, the peak peaking, where you actually, or where the software actually puts the reference, is just so much better and enables a superior calibration. We also modeled some of those components. Obviously, we start with the small guys, since it's quite complex, and we're waiting for supercomputers here to do that for us. So what you can see is that in this case, it's the smallest component, and it's folding really nice around the sodium ion here, and it's really nice and solvated. But you can also see that the small structure, it's not really engulfed yet. So if you go to the bigger molecules, you see that the sodium is still really nicely solvated. And obviously, we calculate the lowest energy for all those possible structures. And it's a lot of possible structures, obviously. But in the end of the day, there's always one structure that is preferred. And so we can come up with a theoretical CCS value and compare those to the experimental values as well. And if you say that the drift tube values is what everybody relates to, you can see that the deviation for the calculated one is in the ±3% range, which is well, it's okay, I guess. It's not super, but this is because the algorithms are not used to calculate with sodium. Bella is working in the background for further work to better those calculations, and also to make the protonated ones, because we also have those values now from the drift tube. If you look at the deviation that the TIMS does and the TWIMS, based on their calibration, you can see that for the lowest one, it's up to 2%. So you can see that the I'm sorry, I think I made this chart wrong here. The gray dots here is actually the TWIMS. So you can see that those always have a positive deviation, whereas the TIMS is more towards a negative one. So you can see that the different calibration standards do introduce what we believe a different error to the system. So what we've done from this is we just took home a lesson, and we said, all right, so we know the properties of the single components, so let's just put them together in a different composition with different intensities, and see what we got. So there might be potentially a product release at an upcoming event, which will be something like that. So we will offer 3 different ranges, a low range covering up to 440, and the plus minus 1 and 2, and the medium range with charge states 1 to 4, going a bit short of 1000 angstrom, and then obviously the big guys covering you up to, well, this is actually not true anymore because we got the true drift tube values. So this was a value from the TIM stuff, and the drift tube values is 1730, I think. So this is what we're gonna put out there for you guys to test and see where that goes for your system. So with that, I would like to round up well, chances to ask questions and discuss is, I mean, right now. And then we will be in Anaheim at booth 259. I will give a similar talk like this on the Monday meeting in the evening, and anytime by email or on LinkedIn or whatever, just Google me up. My name is quite unique, I think, so it should be easy to find me if you can't find the email address. And with that, I would be open for your questions.
Yeah, very good. Ooh, thank you. Thank you, Jens, for the excellent talk. We'll open the call to any questions.
Let me.
Yeah, boss.
Yes, very nice work, Jens. I like the rigidity that you emphasized, that you get very narrow and nice peaks. You never saw Dendrimers sometimes backfold, but because they are so rigid, you don't saw that you never saw a problem of having kind of a folding structure.
No, they can't. It depends on the length of each dendritic unit. So if you look at the Pan Am one, for example, which most people have seen or worked with at some time, for the first thing, they are really not having a good dendritic purity, as we call it. So you can't get this nice unique peak with the Pan Am, and also the spacing is different. So the backbone of each monomer unit is much more flexible in a Pan Am compared to our bis-MPA unit, where it can't backfold. There's no way to do it. If it has, the other guy has to move, and then you just flip the whole thing, and it ends up in the same CCS.
That's good. Yeah. Now, when you add an acid for negative mode, did you see any hydrolysis of the esters?
Not on the short range. Obviously, if you leave it on the bench with acidic conditions, it will degrade. Yeah, it's an ester and it's hydrophilic. It's not happening very quickly, but if you leave it on the bench overnight, you will start to see degradation, yes. But what we will recommend users is just to, dissolve it in a wanted concentration, make your aliquots, put them in the freezer. There you go. So in dry form, they are perfectly safe. But once you add water to it, you have the risk of hydrolysis for sure. But it serves well enough just to put it in the freezer, and they're good to go for a year or two.
Good, that's nice. Yeah, maybe a last question I would ask is the calculations that I see Bella did. That's what you mentioned. Was it molecular mechanics, or is what's even higher? Was it DFT calculations that you did on these systems?
DFT, I think, and I'm sorry, I mean that's why Bella is on the paper, because I can't do that. Yeah. So if you need the details, I would want to refer you to the information in the paper or to ask Bella, because it's really not my piece of cake.
No, because you emphasize that there is that was an error in the calculations ascribed to sodium. The fact that it was sodiated ions instead of protonated ions. And obviously those are difficult systems to calculate because nobody has calculated these types of dendrimers before. But thank you for this information. Maybe one more is that when you made the comparison of CCSs, I was surprised by how much error you can introduce by using the Agilent mix for calibration. But you didn't mention only a little bit. In one slide, you mentioned polyalanine calibration for collision sections. For the very big ions, you have to use polyalanine. I don't think the Agilent mix will do that.
Yeah, but the polyaniline, it will always have it. I mean, it's even called poly-DL, right? So you already in the name can see that it does have different versions, right? So what you will get is just a very broad
peak because of conformation.
Yes, and with that you will have a built-in error in the assignment, right?
Yeah.
And we don't see that for our components. So for that, the calibration is better. And I mean, even if you just look at the decamer of it, which is what's on the slide, you can clearly see that this is so much better with ours, so much neater. So just employing that on a I mean, the what's major mix, I think the biggest one is 12, whatever the fancy word for 12 repeating unit is. So in the water major mix, it ends there. And just extrapolating how I would expect long polymers of it to be, you would just see more and more deviation from a symmetrical curve.
Very nice. I think we definitely need to try this because this can be used for mass as well as collision cross-section calibration. You can use it for two purposes.
Yeah, and I mean the tune mix is made for mass calibration, right? That was, and then when all this IMMS came around, everybody was like, "Oh well, let's just use that and agree on it." But maybe it's not really a perfect case to use it for that. So what we hope, obviously, as a company, to be honest, is that the community realizes the benefits in our molecules and relies on those rather than the tune mix, which works well for mass calibration. I mean, there's nothing to say against that. But obviously, the solubility issue and the fluorine issue and regulations for the coming years, at least on the European side of the ocean, is a question that the Ultramark will have a rough time, I think.
It's coming here too. It won't be many years before fluorine is banned here too. It's getting here too.
And I mean, obviously, it's small amounts, right? And it's always going to be professional usage. It's not a random private person in their kitchen using it. But I don't know how far the regulations will go. But it will make life difficult for at least the supplier, right? Maybe not the end user, but the supplier.
Thank you. Very nice work again. Congrats.
Thank you.
I guess I'll throw one question in. I remember on one of your slides you said that your calibrant was not perceived as sticky. There was like no carryover? It didn't take like nearly as much time to clean out of the mass spec compared to like Agilent tune mix, or?
Yeah, it's I mean it sticks around for like if you inject an empty syringe of your solvent, it sticks around. But once you give it something else to ionize, it disappears quite directly. Especially compared to a pack or something, right? That just sticks around forever. Ours don't. So they are quite strong and intense when you want them, but if you don't want them, they disappear quite quickly.
Cool. Thank you. Well, with that, thank you, Jens, for coming and giving your talk to us. It was very interesting. We appreciate you coming and showing us your cool paper. That was awesome.